Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Holy Happy Hour. I am your host, Josh. And first of all, I want to take this time to thank our sponsor, Religious. As you guys know, they're one of my favorite companies. They just recently came out with our merchandise store, but they also have amazing products themselves. Great way to rep your Catholic faith, but also it's repping your Catholic faith in a subtle way. So it's not just like throwing it down people's throat. But hopefully you can start up great conversations and you can evangelize that way as well. So you guys use promo code HAPPY when you check out. You get 10% off. I'm super excited. So we're going to continue our series, The Journey of Grace, the Catholic Church Sacraments. And so today we're going to be kind of, we were just talking about before, we're kind of going in such a sporadic order, but we're going to be going through the Sacraments of Service. But before we even get there, I want to introduce my guest, which is Deacon Michael Loeffler, who's out from my parish at Christ the King in Tulsa. How's it going, Deacon?
I'm good. How are you today, Josh?
I'm doing great. Always a great day, especially when you wake up in the morning. There's a little bit of bite in the air. Like, it's just my
Finally.
favorite weather. I love it when it's like a little cold. So I left with a sweater, but then I walked out earlier today thinking it's gonna be super hot, and it's not. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. So maybe we're out of that burning up weather.
Shorts and a hoodie is my favorite weather.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And even I would even almost take it further. For me, I love the like pants, and I've got some like North Face boots that were like too expensive, so I want to make sure I get my money's worth
Yeah.
out of them. So wearing something like that, and just I almost like the days where you wake up and it's super cold. You're waiting for your heater to catch up in your car. But I've always been weird. Always preferred cold. I used to tell my mom, you can always put more clothes on. You can only take so much off. But my wife does not agree with me. So but yeah, but I thought we'd start today just kind of letting everyone know. I know a little bit about you, but actually these podcasts have been great for my local people too, because like Father O'Brien had on last week. I did not know his story. Did not know he taught at Bishop Kelly before he
Yeah.
became a priest and all this stuff. So it's also fun for me to kind of get to know you guys better as well. So I don't know if you want to start just a little bit of growing up and then kind of to what you're doing now, like kind of abbreviated testimony.
Yeah, sure. Gosh. Well, I grew up for the most part in Tulsa. I was actually born in New York, but my parents and I moved down here when I was 9 months old.
Mhm.
So I think I can still claim ancestral New York heritage, but basically a
Oh yeah.
lifelong Tulsan.
Hmm.
I went to Marquette and Cascia Hall for
Hmm.
elementary school and high school, and then skipped way ahead, ended up back at both of those places. So my first real job as an adult was teaching at Cascia. I taught there, which is, by the way, the local Augustinian middle and high school
Hmm.
here in Tulsa. I started out as an English teacher there and then became the assistant principal and spent some time in campus ministry and actually just left there after 18 years and
Oh
have
wow.
started my second real job as an adult,
Hmm.
teaching middle school theology and being the school chaplain at Marquette Catholic School, which is
Hmm.
the parish school of our parish, Christ the
Yeah.
King. So that's like the professional take. And then mixed in
Yeah.
with that, I've been married for 19 years to my
Hmm.
wife, April, also a native Oklahoman. We live here in town. We have one son who is a freshman at OSU this year. Go Pokes.
Oh yeah.
They didn't play this weekend, so we can say that
We
proudly,
won.
right?
We won this weekend. Yeah.
We didn't
I,
lose,
yeah, we didn't lose.
um,
Yeah.
which we'll take. Let's see.
Hmm.
And then 7 years ago, I was ordained a deacon for the Diocese of Tulsa. And people often
Nice.
ask, how did you get into that? What's your
Hmm.
vocation story?
Hmm.
And growing up, going to Catholic school, we always heard about vocations and got
Hmm.
the talks and got the pitches. And
Hmm.
I think a religious vocation was always in the back of my head,
Hmm.
but never really in the forefront. And once I met April and found out she was meant to be my wife, then that
Hmm.
really dissipated until a few years later when
Hmm.
we were both sitting at Christ the King before Mass, reading the bulletin before Mass, not during Mass, and got to a little information announcement about, hey, if you're interested in learning more about the diaconate, come to this info
Hmm.
session.
Yeah.
And we kind of looked at each other back and forth because we got to it at the same point, like, hey,
Hmm.
why not? So that
Yeah.
little back of my mind, back
Hmm.
burner, slow cook, took a longer time than for lots of other people to come to fruition. But
Yeah.
we went to that info session, then made the first application and just took it step by step and realized that, yeah, this is what God is calling me to. So
Yeah.
here I am, a deacon 7 years
That's
later.
That's awesome. I actually have a funny story about that. Obviously, I actually just celebrated becoming Catholic. It's my 5-year anniversary, which is kind of crazy to think. People tell me like, yeah, with what you're doing now, you really kind of just dove off the deep end. But funny story. I've always just been super curious about anybody, about everything. Someone could tell me that they work in oil and gas doing blah 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 blah, something I don't even understand, and I just like really curious. Like, what does that even mean? What do you do? Um, and I think it's a blessing. God definitely blessed me with that. It's allowed me to really learn a lot about people. But yeah, I got to know I met Joe Kendrick, who's in the diaconate
Hmm.
program, or about to start. I don't think he's in it yet, but I was telling him, I was like, that's so intriguing. So I'm really curious. What is it, the process for being a deacon? He's like, his eyes lit up. He's like, yeah, let me tell you all about it. And he like showed me all this stuff, and then just like, I don't know, God just playing a joke. Deacon John Summer walked into summer room, and Joe flagged him down. Come here, like Josh is interested in the diaconate, and I was like, oh no. And then Deacon John's eyes lit up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like misleading this so hard right now. And it's not saying that I'm not interested in it, but it's one of those things like, no, I haven't even thought about it. I'm just curious of
Yeah,
how this goes.
it's got
Um,
to start somewhere. Yep.
yeah, yeah, it was really funny story. So and that's cool. So with the deacon world, well, when we talking about the sacraments of service today, it's like a little bit of both. Obviously, you got the priest does a lot more of the sacraments than a deacon does, but I guess it's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, in the U.S., most of the people who have received both of the sacraments of service are
Hmm.
married permanent deacons. We've got a handful of married priests in the U.S.,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
is like a shocker to some people.
yeah,
But we can maybe talk about that, the kind of interesting way that that can happen. But for the most part, if
yeah.
you're going to get all seven sacraments, especially
Hmm.
these two, you're probably a married permanent deacon. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So maybe we'll start with just kind of what I kind of like was thinking, like the flow of this, kind of what they are. First of all, sacraments of service, and then kind of diving deeper into a little bit more of like the how can we discern? Maybe there's people watching that are like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm at that point where I'm not married, and I'm also haven't ruled out being a priest, or and so yeah. Let's maybe start with what they are, and if you want to give us a little rundown of the two, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we group these two together as a pair called the Sacraments of Service, sometimes called the Sacraments of Vocation, and they're both
Hmm.
great names for it.
Yeah.
Vocation is probably a more common term. I think
Hmm.
people know largely that vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, to call.
Hmm.
So your
Hmm.
vocation is what God is calling you to do, or more properly, to be with your life. So this
Yeah.
is something bigger and more important than your career. Right now, my career lines up with my vocation, and I'm
Hmm.
teaching in a Catholic school. But I could quit or get fired and go work at a Quick Trip, and that would be
Hmm.
my new career, which is distinct from my vocation as a Christian.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so the other term, sacraments of service, is a really interesting concept because these two sacraments are unique among all seven. I know you've already talked about the healing sacraments on your
Hmm.
podcast, and
Yeah.
initiation is coming up, I think.
Mhm.
Those other five, baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, confession, and anointing of the sick, when you receive those sacraments, the grace you're receiving is for your own sanctification, or
Mhm.
makes you a more holy person, draws you closer to God. With these two, holy orders and holy matrimony, when you receive the sacrament, the grace you receive is not directly for your own holiness.
Mhm.
It's for the holiness of the people whom you will serve. So in the
Mhm.
case of matrimony, I get married, I receive the sacrament, but that grace is to help me help my wife, and in our case, our child, become more holy. And
Mhm.
obviously, vice versa with her. And
Yeah.
with holy orders, the grace you receive when you get ordained is to help you improve, increase the holiness of the people of your parish or your diocese or whatever community you serve. And if
Mhm.
you get holier in either of those, it's a secondary byproduct of
Mhm.
the service that you've offered to the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say me and my wife like to remind ourselves of that because we are called to help each other get to heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes when, like for me, I know my biggest struggle has always been like pride and humility. I've always wanted to be known. I've always wanted to be the best at things and stuff. And so sometimes it's hard for me to put that aside in like an argument, or put that aside and realize we're not just arguing to prove each other wrong. We need to make sure we're truly doing what's best for each other.
Right.
And so, yeah, when I was doing my research for it and kind of remembering through RCIA and stuff of like the Sacraments of Service, and yeah, just remembering like why they're called that. It's like, this is one of the vocations that's actually for others. Like, it's given to you, but for others, and like ways you can serve and help others get to heaven.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with the Sacrament of Service, I feel like this one's the tougher one of them all, because you don't, and most of us are going to be called to married life. There's going to be some of us called to the priesthood. I'm wondering if, and maybe with having younger kids, maybe have experienced this conversation already, but I know something I've got after converting from people is like, how are you supposed to know? Like, how's this discernment process go? Like, is there something specific that's recommended to people that are maybe in that boat of like, well, okay, I'm 20 years old and I'm in college and I don't know if I'm meant to be married. I'm not dating anyone, but I also don't know if I'm meant to be a priest.
Right. I use the key word to discern.
Yeah.
And discerning is different from deciding.
Mhm.
And I think that distinction helps really paint the picture of what the church is calling us to do. So deciding is all about me. It's me gathering information, thinking what I am interested in, what my desires are, and doing what I want, or even maybe just what I think is the best thing to do.
Yeah.
And there's an element of decision in discernment as well, but discernment is a process that's not so much you-centered, but other-centered. And oh gosh, probably the best way to boil it down is discernment is figuring out what God wants you to do. And then making the decision would be the next step to actually agree with that and go along with it and take that step. So discernment involves gathering facts and information about a vocation, about a religious community, about a state of life. It does include matching it with your own life experience and history and the gifts and the talents that God is giving you. But it has to take that next step and involve deep prayer and introspection to discern what is God really calling me to do with whatever big or small kind of decision you're talking about, but especially with your vocation in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a 2-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter, and I always think to myself, like, it would be so awesome to have a religious sister or have a priest in the family. And our goal has always been to keep that option even on the table. I think so many parents maybe even take it off the table, not like purposely, like, I don't want my kid to be a priest, so let me just put this aside. But I think maybe they take it off the table in a sense of like, they just go along with society of like, where are you going to go to college next? You're going to get a good career because when you have kids, you're going to need to, and so they kind of start planting it in their mind. But I think I tried to not do it as well, going too far of like, I was talking to Father Ditzel afterwards, and I was like, hey, Benedict, you can tell Father Ditzel what you just said. Do you want to be a priest? And Benedict shook his head and was like, yes. And Father Ditzel's like, yeah, just remember, live your will, not your dad's will, or God's will, not your dad's will. And so is that something you guys like, maybe like having a kid that's a little bit older now too, like something you've always kind of kept on the table, but how do we like not push it too far? Like for someone in me, like where I don't want to like not force it, but like, I don't want to be too intrusive, but I also want to make sure they know it's an option.
Yeah, I mean, like anything, it's about finding that right balance, right? You don't want to, like you're saying, even if you don't proactively dismiss it, if you ignore it and just leave it alone, that's not keeping it in your children's minds, which is part of your job. But you also don't want to be pushy and assume that, oh, I think my kid would make a good priest, so therefore he should be a priest. Keeping all the possible vocations in front of them and visible, and really probably even having them think about them proactively is probably the best thing that a parent can do. So that's why if you ever hear me read the petitions at Mass, and there's a petition about vocations, I'll always try to make sure to cover all of them, that for an increase in vocations to the priesthood, religious life, diaconate, and holy matrimony from our parish. And that's
Yeah.
just one small way to, if nothing else, remind me to keep all of these beautiful options on the
Mhm.
table for my parishioners, because each of them is beautiful in its
Yeah.
own way. And no
Mhm.
one is better or higher or more important than the other. Uh,
Mhm.
the key is discerning which one is God calling you, individual, singular you, to in
Yeah.
your life. And if
Mhm.
we, whether proactively or unintentionally, take any of them out of the conversation with our kids or our
Mhm.
parishioners or our students or whoever, then we're, whatever the opposite of seed planting is, right? We're withholding
Yeah.
that seed that we could be
Yeah.
planting in their minds and in their lives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think a family that comes to mind that's such a good example of a lot of this stuff we're talking about is like Saint Louis and Zelly Martin. Like, then they're all their kids. They themselves wanted to be a priest and wanted to be in religious life, and I feel like they kind of went against, like, if they were in friction with God's will for a little bit, and they're like, no, 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 I really want to be a priest. I really want to be a religious life, and it just wasn't working out. And then
Yeah.
and I forget exactly how they met and stuff, but I remember remembering reading in the Extraordinary Parents of Saint Therese, them actually meeting and kind of feeling that, like, I think we're meant to be kind of thing, but they still, even then, were still like, like, I don't know. And then when they had kids, all of their kids, I think every single kid that survived, I know they had a
All
lot
of them
of
that
loss,
survived. Yeah. All the girls.
all,
Yeah.
yeah, became in religious life, which is
Yeah.
awesome. Super cool. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
always exciting to think like that could be my kids one day. I want it. I know some parents don't want it though. Like, some parents, like, I guess there's a sacrifice for your kids that they're going to be making for their lives, but there's also a sacrifice that we're making, or I don't know if we're making. I'm trying to think of the right way to word it, but like, if I have one and only daughter and she goes, all right, we'll say both my kids, these are my only two kids I have, and then become a priest in religious life, it's like my chances now becoming a grandparent hopefully are zero. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
And that absolutely is a sacrifice on the part of a
Yeah.
parent, and that's it's beautiful to go to a priestly ordination
Hmm.
um, for priests whose parents are still alive and are able to
Hmm.
be there. Um, I I often get a good seat. I get a front row
Yeah, yeah.
seat in the
Oh yeah.
choir of deacons, so I get to see these
Hmm.
things. Like, I get to see the parents eye to eye, and to watch
Hmm.
them during an ordination mass is just so
Hmm.
beautiful, because you can
Yeah.
tell what they've gone through. I
Hmm.
won't want to assume each individual person, but
Yeah.
the range of emotions and experiences, starting with what you just said about, oh my gosh, I'm losing the
Hmm.
future of my family, or losing the possibility to be grandparents. But
Hmm.
you can always tell when you see them at an ordination mass, they've they've gotten past that, and they've
Hmm.
reconciled that in their minds, and they see so clearly the beauty of what the gift that they're giving the church. I mean, they've already
Yeah.
given the world and the church this gift of their son just by his
Hmm.
existence, um,
Yeah.
procreating him with the Lord, but now giving him to the church.
Hmm.
I have never seen a set of parents
Hmm.
at their son's ordination mass look sad or disappointed
Yeah.
or forlorn. The
Yeah.
joy on their faces is always so beautiful and evident.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's probably the same feeling that someone would get when they're like, I can imagine like my little girl getting married or something. You're still giving her away, and she's
Yeah,
still now leaving her family to join in this sacrament with another person, and so she now has a new number one. Like, that's now her
yeah,
number one. Like, you're not her number one man anymore, and so I could see like it being that kind of. It's like a sadness, but it's a happy sadness as well.
yeah,
It's
for
like a
sure.
great. So, yeah, I was thinking about the sacrament of matrimony, and I, at first, when I very first saw it, I don't know why, but I was thinking about, like, I wonder how many people think of this one as like you do it once and it's done, and it's like it's there, and you got like stuff like the Eucharist, and I mean, you got a confirmation that's like a one and done, baptism one and done, but like you got a lot of them though that you continuously going back to, and I was thinking about, okay, sacrament of matrimony be kind of like in that same category as, yeah, there's only one wedding. But then I realized that it's like, oh, actually, but this is like a forever sacrament that you would also be going back to, kind of renewing vows and reminding yourself to that you are trying to get each other to heaven. What are there anything that you and your wife do to try to remind yourselves that, like, on a
Mm.
regular basis?
Yeah, and that begins in the marriage ceremony itself. So there are different
Yeah.
versions of the vows that we can use, but whichever one we pick, we always say either till death do you part or for as long as you both shall live. So you're right.
Yeah.
It's not like baptism or confirmation or holy orders, which we call a character sacrament that makes an indelible mark on your soul. But it
Yeah.
is until one of you dies.
Yeah.
It's a life. It's not an eternal commitment, but it's a lifelong commitment to get each other to eternity together, God willing, right?
Yeah.
So what do we do? It's really interesting to ask me that question now, being newly empty nester
Yeah.
married couple, and we got pregnant really soon after we got married, like soon enough that you could tell people doing the math in their head to make sure, like 9 months.
Yeah.
That's how early we got pregnant. So for almost all of our married life, we've either been pregnant or had our son. And now, I mean, we still have our son, of course, but he's gone from the house now. So we're finding, trying to find new ways to live this new phase of our life as a married couple together. And it's really been like fun and interesting to get to know each other in this new phase, while still relatively young and have a lot of time to spend in that new phase of our life. And I think a key for the two of us is being intentional. We're both really busy with jobs, school, ministry for me. April is very active in the church too, and professionally. And so it would be very easy for us to just be caught up in all of the calendar items that fill up our days, and to be intentional about making time for just the two of us, which was equally hard, as you know by now, when you have kids, probably even harder when you have kids. But it's different. It's hard, but just in a different way in this new phase of our life. But equally important that we don't have to, not just this past weekend, like, oh, maybe we should go to a little trip to Arkansas or something and go somewhere for the weekend. Okay, decided, you know what, we can stay home and do stuff around town and have just as good a time and have that reconnection and not spend a ton of money doing it. And I think that's what people think, that they got to do something big and flashy, whether it's a humongous gift or a big trip to grow somewhere to really reconnect. But it's more about the intentionality of spending the time and the quality of the time that you give to each other, regardless of where that happens, on your couch or a fancy hotel.
Yeah, for sure. We've had some dates where we've gone out to eat and gone to a movie, then gone and got a drink at our favorite brewery afterwards, and it was great. It was a little over $100 or something. But then we've had times where we went to a coffee shop and it was $6, and we had more intentional time. Felt like we sitting there for an hour rather than doing a whole night of it was much more fruitful. And it also was, I think sometimes I get caught up in because we are in that 4 and 2-year-old phase. So you got to get a babysitter, then you got to plan it, you got to do all this stuff. And it just seems, it gets overwhelming. It gets to this point where, and I think maybe the enemy works like this, like tries to get you, like, well, you know, you have work and you're doing this podcast thing and you got that church event this week and you told Axe you do the Axe retreat, and you get caught up like, man, I'm so overwhelmed. And then you kind of get paralyzed to not even make a decision. And then you end up like, going like this was us recently. We're like, when was the last time we went on a date? I don't even remember. And it's like, all we need to do is get one of the moms to come over, watch the kids, and then let's go on a walk, or let's go to a nearby coffee shop and drop $6 on a couple of black coffees. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot. It just takes some intentional time, because this life will take it away from you fast. I feel like you want to be you definitely want to be the best husband, but even when you have all the intentions right, because society is so like busy, go, you can really say yes to too many things, and all of a sudden your wife has taken a back seat and you didn't even mean for it to happen.
And I'll call it a skill, one of the most important skills that was taught to us in deacon formation was the skill of saying no. Avoiding the temptation to agree to every single thing that's asked of you, that's proposed to you, that's offered to you. They're all good things, but if you say yes to every single good thing that could possibly pop up on your calendar, you end up looking around saying, where did that day go? Where did that week go? Where did that year go?
Yeah.
And you want your no's to be as intentional as your yeses.
Yeah.
To create the time for leisure and relationships and the things that don't have an invite pop up on your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's me and my wife are terrible at that. Like she volunteers kind of like you guys. She volunteers. She's super plugged into the church. I'm super plugged into the church. Kind of super plugged into 2 churches now with working at TU. But but we're constantly saying yes things. Doing the Acts retreat now. Went to Father Elkin's spirituality series. There's like the silent walks that are coming up. We both want to go on, and then we finally just had to sit down. It's like, okay, like, which ones are we not going to do? We can't. Even this year, we wanted to go to Seek. Thought it'd be great. Yeah. Great for the podcast. Great experience for us. We went last year, but we're like, when it comes down to being responsible, we're going to have to pick something not to do. And not only will this take so much time, energy, and effort to do, but it's also going to be something I think will take a toll on our marriage as well. So we actually found that it'll be super fruitful and good for our spiritual life to not attend Seek. And Branson was like, yeah, you absolutely shouldn't go. This would be something great. You'll be able to listen to talks. Like, don't worry about that.
And those are discernment situations just as much as the big discernment of discerning your vocation to marriage. When you discern things like these opportunities, that's when you connect the dots and you see big picture what this is meaning for your life, and you're not just deciding to do or not to do this. You're discerning each decision as part of the overall life of your vocation.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard someone recently. It's cool hearing the vocation stories from people that feel like they might be called to be a priest, but they're not sure. So they go for it, and they like take that courage and go for it to become a priest, but then they discern out and actually end up getting married. And Michael Martin's one of the first people that comes to mind here in Tulsa. And he just had this feeling while he was there that everything was great, but he's like, I feel like I cannot keep Sarah out of my mind. And he's like, you know what, when I leave for the summer, I'm going to follow up with her and see what's going on. And then when he talked to his spiritual director, he was like, I think that you should take a week and treat it as if you were going to like court her, basically, and just see how the week goes, see how your heart feels and everything. And he just never felt more at peace, and ended up discerning out. They're now have a kid and just a beautiful family, live really close near us, great friends of ours. And it's cool to hear those stories too.
It is.
And so I don't know if that would be something you'd even recommend. Like if so you had a high school student come and like, hey, I'm discerning. I don't know. I'm discerning. I feel like I've always wanted to be married and I feel really called to that, but also the priesthood kind of sounds good. Would you almost recommend, maybe not recommend, like, don't just go enroll in seminary and go, but maybe like, I guess go visit, go see what it's all about?
The same way that you start a romantic relationship, hopefully with a friendship or meeting, and then you go on a few dates and then things get increasingly more serious. That's exactly what any kind of religious vocation, the process should be too, whether to the priesthood or religious life or even the diaconate, that you don't show up on day one and sign a contract for the rest of your life. Just like most people don't propose to their girlfriends on their first dates. That whether priesthood, religious life, or diaconate, you do the first thing, whether that means, and for seminary, it's a little bigger deal, right? Yeah, once you discern that, you are basically committing to a year, maybe a semester, but probably a year in seminary. But if it turns out not to be what God's calling you to, that's not a waste of time. And I think that's what people are really afraid of, that if it turns out not to be what I'm called, I will have wasted my time. And this was presented to us in deacon formation all the time, that even if you get 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in, and I love the language you use, discern out, it will not have been wasted, because they told us everything you learn will make you a better husband, father, whatever your career is. And the same would be true of seminary or religious formation for a brother or sister. Nothing you learn from the church is going to go to waste. You might end up applying it in a different way than you expected, but it will all be beneficial for the building up of your own virtue, your own faith, and therefore what you can give to others, however that ends up happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I always wonder if I doubt this, but like, I would make this joke about, I was meant to be Catholic after I met my wife. I met her, we were dating, and she introduced me to it. I was like, because I'm one of those people that can say, hey, like this fact. I can just name a fact, and all you have to do is say, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Nope, I'm not sure." And so I'm like, I just second guess myself so much, which is funny because I did a charism assessment. Discernment's actually my number one.
Yeah.
And Jill Simons was like, "I think that what that means is you need to go through gut." It's like most of the time is your gut right, and I was like, "Yeah, I think so." Like
And then you start overthinking.
Yeah. So I told her if that was one of them, that would be my second. My second discernment would be number one. Overthinking would be number two. But yeah, discernment was my number one. I just told her my gut's usually right, I think, but then I second guess it. And so she's like, yeah, you probably need to just do like the litany of trust and like just trusting in how God's working in you. Because when people are going through these discernment process here on campus, we have a discernment group. It's these men that meet with Father Zui, and there's like 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
Super cool. But I was like, man, I do not envy being in your guys' shoes, because that is such a big decision to make. And I feel like I could easily go like, I could have gone, I want to be a priest, and someone could have easily just been like, are you sure? I'm like, nope, I am not sure. But yeah, it is. It's just like a discernment process. You're definitely going to learn to pray and listen to God. And yeah, I think it's something though, you just go for it and see where he leads you. Because I think he could even lead you down the path to be in seminary for a few years, and it forms you to then be ready to meet your spouse.
Yeah, and all of that is one reason why I love what we're doing here in the Diocese of Tulsa with marriage preparation as well. Yeah. Every day we're taking more and more steps to prepare engaged couples for marriage, as equally well as we do men to become priests, men to become deacons, men or women to become religious. And so the intent, again, the intentionality of helping engage couples to learn, what does the church teach about marriage, knowing what you're saying yes to, more than just the other person, but what is the sacrament, what is the vocation you're saying yes to, and then also discerning the person as well. So the Catholic Engaged Encounter, which my wife and I have been on the team with for a little bit, it's just amazing to see the depth of that experience, and everything that's presented to these engaged couples very honestly, very frankly, very really, because they don't know. And that's a part of, like I mentioned, part of discernment is gathering information, so that when you end up saying yes, you're saying yes to the real thing, not your preconceived notion of what that thing is. And that fits for any vocation.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that, we did an episode with Audrey Stubblefield, and it was amazing. And I had her start, and I said, so for people aren't going to know what all Catholics have to do, or maybe they do, but like, let's refresh. What is the checklist? And she pulled it out, and she's like, this is everything you have to do before you get married. And she started listing it, and it was so funny because it took her like 45 seconds to list everything, it seemed like. And then afterwards, I was like, it's awesome. I love it because I'm Catholic. But for those non-Catholics listening, why on earth do we have to go through that much stuff? And it was just an awesome conversation of like why we take it so seriously. And it may seem overkill, but there's nothing in that that's not just prepping you for things that are going to come up, because it is a till death do you part. This is a different ring, but the ring I actually got married with, and the inside is engraved, I choose you. And that's something that me and my wife always talked about. It's like, we're gonna hit rough patches. We could hit some real rough patches, but no matter what, like, we don't want to just say like, you can't divorce me because we're Catholic, can't do it. But it's like, but we want to make sure it's like it's not something that we just believe because we're Catholic we can't get divorced. But it's like something, it's like, no, it's not that is kind of it, but like, it's also it's a choice. Like, we're choosing not to ever split up because we are taking these vows extremely seriously. It's a covenant is what we are signing up for.
And when I teach about matrimony to high school students especially, but also to adults, I draw that distinction between a contract and a covenant. Because when you get married in the church, you're also getting married according to the state of Oklahoma in our case. And to Oklahoma, it's a contract that has stipulations and that can be dissolved. But the covenant obviously involves God. It involves a lifelong decision. And the thing that I love perhaps most about the actual rite of matrimony itself is something that I think a lot of people don't know until they start a marriage preparation class or they take a sacraments class, is that the husband and wife, the bride and the groom, administer the sacrament to each other. A lot of people assume it's your priest or your deacon who's the minister of that sacrament, but really, I don't want to minimize it, but his role is the official witness of the church to receive the vows, to bless the new union, but the bride and the groom administer the sacrament to each other. And remembering that when things get difficult, I think it's just such a great source of restorative grace. That's not something that stops in the 30 seconds that you take to say your vows, but that continues throughout the life of your marriage, that you continually administer Christ's grace to each other as husband and wife.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I'm glad you brought up the Catholic Engaged Encounters, because we're now joining the team. Well, we have joined the team as well, and we actually we decided we wanted to join Catholic Engaged Encounter as a team on the Catholic Engaged Encounter weekend. So when we were there, we actually so we were going on the shadow retreat. We were going out there to do it, and that was going to be the recommendation. Anyone listening was, if you're Catholic and you're interested in growing in your faith, go shadow a Catholic Engaged Encounter weekend, because it's amazing. Going through it again when you have now been married maybe a few years or whatever, but we went through it, and so my wife, just being brilliant, she was like, let's take our books with us. And so we took them with us, and we flipped through, and it's like we had everything that they were going through, and we saw what we wrote 5 years ago, and it was super cool. But in it, one of them, like, what do you want to do as a couple to grow in your faith? One of those last reflection questions, and the very last bullet point we wrote was become Catholic Engaged Encounter presenters. And it was super cool. And so we talked to Father Elk when we got back, and he was like, yeah, so typically you're gonna be married for 5 years before you do it. So we'll talk on it, and let's just let's stay in touch. He actually called us on August 1st, and our 5-year anniversary was August 17th, to ask us if we wanted to shadow, and we shadowed like a couple weeks after our anniversary. So it's like, I think Father Elk can like mark that in his calendar or something. Like,
wouldn't surprise me.
On year 5, August 1st, August of 2024 is when they will hit 5 years. Let's ask them to be engaged encounter things. That would not surprise me at all with how he is. But yeah, so we went out there, and it was awesome. We loved it. We probably got just as much, if not more, out of it the second time we went through it, because it was super cool to see, like, whoa, this is awesome, how much you've grown in this, Lindsay. You used to be like this, and like these are the things you struggled with, and you're not struggling with them anymore. And it was cool. It was really cool to see, and it kind of got us back into kind of that lovey-dovey honeymoon feel on that weekend, that then we were able to use as like motivation to keep trotting forward. And some of those little things that were kind of bothering us, that are always going to come up in a marriage, stopped bothering us as much. We were back on the mindset of like, whatever you do and you're struggling with, I'm not going to let it affect me in a negative way so that I'm responding negative, but I'm going to let it affect me in like a way that makes me want to help you. Like when you're coming to me, you're not coming to me as like a person that wants to hurt me. You're coming to me as a broken person that needs my help. And so that's how we try to look at each other. But yeah, it's a great one. I feel like nowadays I can't really go to a wedding that's outside of the Catholic Church without it just kind of feeling like there's like, I don't know, a lack of, I don't know, seriousness, I guess is maybe the word. Not to like just bash on anybody, but like it just sometimes feels like that wedding reception or the wedding ceremony is like 10 minutes to get to the party afterwards.
Our wedding, we did, if there was an option to do this or not do it, we did everything. So like we had all of the music, we had all of the mass parts, we had all of the readings. If there was ever a yes or no, it was yes. Yeah. And at the time, people said, oh my gosh, that was the longest wedding I've ever been to. But now, pushing 20 years later, people every year say, oh, your wedding was one of the most beautiful weddings we've ever been to. And it's not because we spent a ton of money on it, for a dress or a tux or flowers. We just, it was nice, but we did everything that the church offered to us for our wedding ceremony, because we knew that was it, like one and done. So why not do everything that is open to us? And to this day, people, that's what they remember about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the last questions to kind of wrap up the vocation stuff is, I heard a kind of a controversial statement for Oklahoma people, but it was a priest out of Wichita, and it was our Catholic Engaged Encounter. But he was like, nothing. It's like he said something about like the reason we have so many priests or so many people in seminary, so many priests, is because we don't have a backup option. We don't have the permanent diaconate. And he goes, I'm not saying I'm against it. No, wait, yes, I am. I am against it. And I was like, that's really curious to me, because at one point, I mean, I guess I kind of get it. If someone was discerning out and wanting to may possibly discern out of being a priest, it's like, well, I guess I could always be a deacon and be married, kind of best of both worlds. But at the same time, I think he was putting it in a little bit of an extreme way. Like, someone's not going to be like, well, I want to be a priest, but I also want to engage in some of the luxuries of being married, so I'm just going to do this. I don't feel like anyone would go at it that way. But what do you think about kind of the permanent diaconate? Obviously, for me, it's something that, like, I've been Catholic for 5 years. Permanent diaconates here in Oklahoma, I love it. But what are your thoughts on that? On like that kind of comment?
Yeah. So this priest that you're thankfully leaving anonymous, his opinion is not unique. But the first thing I would say in response to that is, if a man had that perspective and left seminary for that reason, he should not be a priest in the first place. Yeah. Because he's splitting his attention, he's splitting his desires. He's saying, well, maybe I can do this and this. No vocation should have that wishy-washiness at its core. So maybe he is called to be a priest, but right is not always right now. Yeah. And so a man like that might need a little more time to mature and discern a little better and align his will better with God and figure out where God is calling him. But if a person thinks that about the diaconate, it's a totally misunderstanding of what the diaconate is. The diaconate is not JV priest. Yeah. The diaconate is its own distinct order within the Sacrament of Holy Orders. That it is a conforming of the self to Christ, who came to serve, not to be served. And yes, there's some things that a deacon can do, like teach an RCIA class, or that lay people can do. But that's not the point. The point is not, what does a deacon do, and could I do this stuff without being a deacon, or what does a priest do, and could I do some of that stuff? It's about who you are and who God is calling you to be. Yeah. So the diaconate is its own beautiful thing of service to the church. It's often understood as a bridge between the church and the faithful, like the church institution and the lay faithful, because deacons are clergy. We are ordained in our diocese. Thank Bishop Conderla and Bishop Slattery, God rest his soul, for letting us wear clerics to show the world who we are, just like priests and bishops do. Yeah. But we're coming out of, and a lot of my brother deacons are employed in the secular world, engineers, lawyers, accountants, store managers, you name it. And so a lot of deacons do live kind of in both worlds and can be a bridge builder between the two. But the Latin word for bridge builder is pontifex. And one of the titles for the Pope is the Supreme Pontifex, the Supreme Bridge Builder. It's a distinct, unique role for the diaconate, and something for a man to discern separate from, is God calling me to be a priest? Is God calling me to be a husband? So yes, it usually does happen later in life, kind of secondary, not in terms of priority, but in terms of history, vocation. But it's no less permanent. It's no less fruitful. It's no less distinct than the difference between a bishop and a priest. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding. And I think here in the Diocese of Tulsa, again, with Bishop Slattery and Bishop Conderla, have done just a tremendous job of allowing the diaconate to foster and allowing the individual deacons to go find the things that make sense for them to do in their ministry. So we have a deacon as the chancellor of our diocese, a deacon as the CEO of Catholic Charities, CEO of the Catholic Cemetery, deacons teaching in the schools, deacons working in the parishes, but also out in the secular world. And we're all doing what God is calling us to do in such a beautiful diversity of ways that would not be happening if our bishops hadn't encouraged the flourishing of the diaconate in our diocese.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I like it. Yeah, I like how you mentioned it. Yeah, it's not as like the JV priests. I almost look at deacons. I don't know why this came to my head. My brain thinks very weird, but it's almost like I almost think of them more of like the Dwight Schrute of the Office, of like someone who's so dedicated, and is like, it's almost like an upgraded layperson. It's like a layperson that wants to dedicate even more of their life to the church and to helping out and to administering this specific sacraments that they are eligible to do. That's why I've always looked at it. And so when I heard that, I too, it was funny because it was, I think, it wasn't the Catholic Engagement Council, it was the Acts Retreat, because I remember a bunch of the Tulsa guys were like asking questions and stuff. It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But he was very respectful back. He wasn't like bashing anybody or saying, no, you guys are wrong, we're right. He was like, it's just a difference in what and how things are run or whatever. But he was very respectful at the end of the day. But
a great way I've heard this described is that in a really traditional cathedral, let's say a chrism mass or an ordination, when the bishop is there, the priests are there, the deacons are there, the traditional setup for a church, a cruciform church that's shaped like a cross, and a traditional way for people to be seated at a mass like this is for the bishop to be at the altar celebrating the mass, and say, like during the liturgy of the word, the priest would be in one transept and the deacons in the other, so that the imagery is the bishop as the head, at the head of that cruciform church, with the priests as one of his hands on that cross and the deacons as the other. And that he really needs both. He needs the priests doing the sacramental work and the deacons doing the service work for both of his hands to be effective in serving the church. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, well, that's a lot of great information. So I guess to close out kind of our talks on the Sacraments of Service, what kind of advice would you give to anyone that's out there, like I said, possibly listening, maybe I guess you're maybe around your son's age and kind of entering this stage of life, and they are discerning, they don't, what am I called to do? What would be like your biggest advice for them?
I think you already mentioned the key to it, in that you have discernment groups at St. Philip Neri.
Yeah.
I think that's critical. To try to discern on your own, it's just not going to work. So getting whether you're connecting yourself to the director of vocations, like Father Zui in our diocese, or to a discernment group at your parish or on your campus, or even if you're just talking to your pastor or a deacon or a trusted person in your life who shares the faith with you, that's really step one. Because if it all stays in your head, you're only really relying on yourself. And being able to bounce what you're thinking and what you're feeling, what you're praying about, off another person or off a group of people is critical. And the people like your pastor or your spiritual director or vocations director has the experience to hear what you're experiencing and help you say, yeah, I've seen this hundreds of times, and what you're going through is, you're not alone in this. And in my experience, when guys feel X, here's what it has ended up meaning for them, and provide some context to it, because we don't discern in a vacuum. We discern in the church. It's ultimately, like we said, figuring out what God is calling you to. So finding a person or a small group to do that work in, and making sure that prayer is a deep part of it. That you're discerning, not just deciding. Gather the facts, gather the information, yes, but take it all to prayer. And maybe the biggest thing, so a list of 3, don't try to do this alone. Remember to ground this in prayer, and making sure that you are discerning God's will and not trying to cram a vocation into what you think you want for your life.
Yeah.
If you're too centered on that, it's not going to turn out well. But no one who has discerned their true vocation is really unhappy. There's something Father Zui will talk about all day long, that the biggest key to knowing that you're in the right path in your discernment is, how happy is this making you? And that deep happiness that comes from only from fulfilling what God has planned for your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my last advice too would be, Father Elkin gave it to me for this podcast even, because like you said, we're discerning all the time, discerning everything, or we should be discerning it with God of making decisions. When I started this podcast, like I said earlier, I kind of struggled with pride and humility, and I wanted to make sure I'm not trying to be the next Matt Fradd. I'm not trying to be like worked so I can man, one day I'm gonna be a speaker at Seek and I'm gonna travel the world, I'm gonna do all this stuff. But it's not for me, it's for God. And so I asked Father Elkin, I was like, how do I do this? Because I want to make sure my intentions are pure. And he said, first of all, you're going to have to constantly purify your intentions. But my biggest advice for you is pray for it to fail. Pray for it to fail, move forward with it, and say, God, if this is not your will, let it fail. So in my instance, I was able to say, like, let it fail, let the subscribers not come, let the views not happen. And it has done the opposite. I've seen it's definitely something that brings me joy. It's something that I feel like I'm able to do for others, kind of in the context of it's cool. Sacraments of Service, we're doing for others. This podcast is not a sacrament, but it is something I want to do for others and make sure it's never about me. It's just Jesus shining through me through this. And so, yeah, that would be my biggest thing. Do you feel like you need to get married, want to get married, especially if it's not working out? You want to pray for it to fail. Sounds so weird, but it's one of those things like, God, if this is not your will, don't let it work out, because he won't let it work out if it's not meant to be. Yep. So awesome. Well, we're going to close this out with the Saint draft. Before we start that, though, I want to make sure to do the normal thing that all podcasters hate to do. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment. You guys know the drill. I have this motto I always say on this thing. It's like, when people like, comment, subscribe, it's like the social media version of evangelizing, because it posters it out to people and it's like, hey, you might like this. When you share it on social media, you share it on Facebook, like if Dcn Loeffler shares this on Facebook, all of his friends would be like, oh, you might also like to see this. And that's just how the algorithm works. We can trick the algorithm into evangelizing. So it's super easy.
Why not?
It's right down here. Just like it.
Right there. Click. Subscribe.
Yeah. And speaking of God blessing this channel, we're right now shooting for 2,500 subscribers. It's so crazy. We passed 1,000. We're almost at 1,200 right now, and that's the next milestone. So thank you guys to all who have subscribed so far. We're super grateful. We've got an awesome team that's about to come on, and we're just about to really start putting out as much content, because our goal is to just help people grow in their faith. We're trying to grow in our faith here, and that's what I just like to meet with people like Dcn that can help me grow in my faith, and you guys along as well. So all right, so we're going to jump into the Saint draft. This one, I love this game. I'm going to make like a board game out of it. But the Saint draft is, so we'll go back and forth. Just, are you a sports guy at all?
Baseball, especially. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So the draft makes sense. Some guests on here, like, what do you mean draft? Like, what we do? It's like, well, it's like the NBA draft, like the MLB draft. So like, once you pick them, they're off the table. So yes, we'll do a starting 5, and instead of a starting 11. That'd be a little tough. But starting 5 plus a 6-man. 6-man is typically a blessed. Someone's not quite a saint yet. Once they're picked, they're off the table. And the goal is, we're trying to build a team that if they were alive today, they could just save the world, like everything be best. So we'll do a pick a saint and then a little bit of a reason why. So I always let the guests go first, and I always kind of match my answers to yours. So yeah, go for it.
Well, I thought it might be cheating to pick St. Michael, since you said a saint if he were alive today. So I assumed that meant we're talking like human saint. So just to be fair, I took the archangels off the list.
Okay.
And then after that, for my number 1, I think I'm going to have to go with whichever James wrote the letter of James. Okay. Now, we're not because there were 2 James apostles, and maybe it was one of them, maybe it was a different guy, kind of depends who you ask. But whichever James wrote the letter of James, I bring him back in a heartbeat, because that thing is just so, I mean, cut to the quick, pull no punches, tell us what we need to do and what we need to know. I think our world could use some of that. So letter writing St. James, my number 1.
Okay, letter writing St. James. Okay, so my number 1, then I would go, if I'm like I said, I would just like match the answers. So someone else who wrote a bunch of letters, and it's hard not to go with them. I also love that we're studying 1 Corinthians right now, so it'd be St. Paul. I love that in that he actually tells them, like, I came to you with no wisdom. I didn't come to you being the smartest person, but I came to you proclaiming the gospel and living out my faith. And he encouraged them to do the same, because I feel like that's the biggest thing that holds people back from evangelizing. It was my biggest thing that actually held me back from starting. Well, not biggest thing. Second biggest thing that held me back from starting this up is like, kind of like, who am I to like start a Catholic podcast? And I always tell people, if you're here for theological answers, the deepest, the most understandable knowledge, you came to the right place, because I can tell you catholicanswers.com is where you should go. And so mine is more of, it would be called Catholic Questions. So I would go St. Paul as he's also very skilled writer and responsible for a lot of books in the Bible, which I love.
Okay.
Round
my
2.
number 2, especially given my Augustinian heritage and background, I am going with Saint Rita of Cascia for my number 2. As a woman who experienced every state of life open to women, single, married, mother, widow, and religious, was interested in being religious from the very beginning of her life, but God led her in a different direction. But then ultimately, as a widow, ended up in the Augustinian community. And the Augustinians call her the peacemaker because of reconciling the two factions within her town, one of which her husband belonged to and was killed, and then this warring faction, and making peace between them, to the point that that's what got her into the convent. The Augustinian sisters were worried that if they let her in, this other warring faction family would be upset. And so Rita had to reconcile them before they would allow her into their community. And pretty clearly, our world could use a lot of that right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say that may be one of the most relevant picks ever on the channel. Yeah, that should be awesome. Okay, I think for mine to be relevant to today's world, and it's someone I can usually take as my 5th pick because no one's going to pick him. No one knows much about him, and I didn't until I started working here. But Saint Philip Neri, I love he could have inherited a huge business. He is the patron saint of joy, which is also something we need. But it's just, I love that he was he answered God's call for sure to go live with the poor, serve the poor, and he did. And he had a spiritual director. He regularly attended mass. He was a king of the little way of evangelization, just met guys one-on-one. And as soon as they were ready to give their life over to God, the first thing he did was took them, they prayed. And then he took them straight to a hospital, straight to a school, straight to somewhere in need, and got them plugged in. And it wasn't until 13 years into his ministry that his spiritual director was like, you can make such a bigger impact if you were a priest. And then he went and became a priest. And I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. But I think that was something I had to do. I had to discern whether I couldn't work here at St. Philip Neri and own my business at the same time. And I had to discern, and I really felt a strong urge to sell my business. And it was around this time, and I was like learning about St. Philip Neri and all this stuff. And I was like, that could have been St. Philip Neri in my ear. Like, dude, just do it. Just get rid of it. But yeah, St. Philip Neri, like, let's be more detached from this world, and let's be more attached to the next. Kind of from, was it this last week's gospel? No, it wasn't this last week's gospel. But whenever Pontius Pilate's talking to Jesus, he's like, my kingdom's not of this world. I try to think my life's not of this world. I'm here temporarily, but my life is, I should be thinking more eternally.
Yeah, this past Sunday was the rich young man who was saddened when Jesus called him to give up what he had. Yeah. Okay, my turn for number 3. As a deacon, it would be tough for me to leave St. Stephen on the table. So I'm going to pick him for number 3, one of the original deacons in the book of Acts and the first Christian martyr. So we see in Acts, the deacons were initially selected to do a lot of the practical work that was needed in distributing charity in the church. But obviously, really quickly, Stephen also picked up preaching and evangelization to the point that he becomes the first Christian martyr. So he's just a great example for deacons and for everyone that we're meant to do both. We're meant to do work in the world and meet the needs of the people in need. But at the same time, we're called to preach with our words and not be afraid to share the gospel explicitly with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Was he the one that was grilled or whatever?
No, that was Lawrence, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Lawrence, yeah.
Stephen was stoned.
I remember them telling us, like, that's why the deacons, like, the stripes are across. I'm like, that's so funny. Okay, so St. Stephen, that's a good one. Now, I told Daniel McKay, who does like a bunch of the multimedia for the diocese, runs their podcast. He's eventually going to be coming on as well. And I told him, I was like, you're going to have so much fun with this section because you're going to be able to put like little things I can say, like, that's actually the first time he's been picked. It'd be like some alarm or something. I don't know. Okay, so 3rd pick. Okay. This is where it gets tough because there's so many people you can get in there. There's so many great ones. And we've kind of mentioned her already, but I just love how much faith she had, and she was so eager to serve. But Saint Therese of Lisieux, I think was awesome. another one that was just, she knew right away what her vocation was. And so we can maybe ask her for her prayers. If you're discerning right now, you're not sure, St. Therese may be the perfect person for you to ask for her prayers and get some clarity there, because she never did not have clarity there.
I've got a big list, and I think I'm going to have to take your strategy of kind of matching your pick.
Yeah.
I think a similar person, I'm going to go with Mary of Bethany.
Okay.
Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Mary.
Yeah.
Mary who chose the better part. Mary who didn't care about her the calendar invites on her phone and created the time to just be with our Lord. And I know I need that kind of reminder, and I think our world needs that kind of reminder a lot of times.
Yeah. I remember seeing a shirt that says like, "Be a Mary, not a Martha," or something like that. Which is stuff like, it's my wife's patron saint for confirmation was Martha, I believe. And it's cool because like she definitely made the better choices. Martha did some great things too, but she's a great one. All right. Number 4, I always have a hard time not going with 2 guys, and I'll try to leave one of them off and challenge myself. But I'm gonna go St. Francis Xavier, kind of patron saint of missionaries.
Yeah.
I love everything Focus is doing. Maybe that's the perfect time to plug this, but next month we have a great guest in Dr. Edward Shree, who's one of the co-founders of Focus. He said yes to this. I think it was the email. When I sent the email, I said, I'm one of the probably rare people that works with Focus missionaries on campus. I know one of the Focus missionaries that was at the hospital that when they tried that here in Tulsa, and I work with Focus missionaries in Bible study and discipleship through my parish. And I bet that's what got him. I bet he was like, oh, I have to do this guy's podcast. But yeah, so I would probably go St. Francis Xavier, because I think the work they're doing is great, but I think that there could be even more stuff going on.
Oh man, so I've got about 5 left, and I was really prepared just in case you took all 5 of the ones I wanted. I came up with 10, so now I'm down my last one. I am going to have to go with my son's confirmation patron saint, John the Baptist.
Oh, that's going.
Not afraid to speak truth to power, but the truth that he spoke was the truth of necessity and charity and repentance, and telling us exactly what we need to do in our own lives. But the most important thing he said was, behold the Lamb of God. And just not afraid to be outside of that societal box. And follow radically what God wanted him to do to prepare his way.
Yeah. I was thinking about like his role too. He kind of had a tough role. He was like the one going ahead. Like, you go forward by yourself. I don't know if he's by himself, but like basically by yourself, and pave the path and like make the path straight. And I've always loved that about him. Actually, at a fundraising conference, and like, who's some saints you guys pray to help you with your fundraising? And obviously St. Catherine Drexel, who is awesome. She does some stuff here at Tulsa. But then someone was like St. John the Baptist, and someone was like, explain that. Like, what do you mean? It's like, well, he went forward and set the path straight. He was basically ahead of the mission. And that's what we do as fundraisers. We raise money for the mission. Right now, we don't need to raise any more money for this year. We're good for this year, but we're thinking into the future. Like, I'm ahead of the game of raising money so that this mission can continue to be fruitful. And so I was like, oh, that's so good. Like, I love that. So I got a little St. John the Baptist prayer card, which is awesome. All right. So I'd probably go, I think, we're not willing to sacrifice things, just kind of like the rich man from this past Sunday. I think that a lot of times, and I fall into this, it's hard to, if there's a church event or some friend's birthday or something, and it's like, oh, dang, it's on college football Saturday. Can I have my phone out watching it? And like, I find myself like just menial things that don't mean anything, like trying to trying to hold on to something I should just let go. It's just sacrifice. And I think one of the biggest people that sacrificed his life for another is St. Maximilian Kolbe. There's a lot of people that did some stuff, but I love his story. Just concentration camps, like, hold on. And he like identified himself as a priest, said, let me go in his place and save the man who had a wife and kid. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, we as men need to be able to do that. Just Catholics in general, but men need to be able to do that too. So I'll get St. Maximilian Kolbe to round out mine. And the last one will be Blessed. They're not quite saints yet, but they're coming. They're gonna be.
Oh my gosh. I've got three. I got three in mind, and I guess I can talk them out since
Yeah.
I'm torn between Solanus Casey,
Yeah.
Carlo Acutis, and our own homegrown Stanley Rother.
Yeah.
Um,
Stanley Rother's the most commonly picked one.
I
Obviously, we're
I
out of
think I'm gonna
Oklahoma.
I think I'm gonna have to go pull John the Baptist, go outside the box, and go with Solanus Casey,
Okay.
who is an American like Stanley,
Mm-hmm.
and sought the religious life, and
Mm-hmm.
also like Stanley was not the best academic student,
Mm-hmm.
was ordained a priest, but this weird thing called a simplex priest. So he was not allowed to preach homilies publicly,
Mm.
was not allowed to hear confessions because his superiors were worried that he wasn't, the sharpest tool in the shed.
Yeah.
So the job they gave him was porter, literally the
Mm.
doorman at their
Oh, wow.
community. So when people knocked because they needed money or they wanted to know what time mass was, he opened the door and talked to the people in need, and
Oh, wow.
developed this supernatural gift of
Mm.
knowing, being able to tell exactly what they needed, not
Mm.
only materially but more importantly spiritually, and so
Yeah.
became this wildly popular and sought after spiritual
Mm-hmm.
director and guide.
Nice.
But doing so from the literally the lowliest station he could have had in his community, and now he's on his way to
Wow.
being an
Wow.
American saint, God willing.
That's awesome. I've heard that name before on the show. I can't remember who picked him, but that one's a rare one picked. Now I'm gonna go with someone I go with often, and he's not even a blessed yet, but he's coming. He's definitely coming. I mean, he died recently, but it's Venerable Father Aloysius Schwartz.
I don't know
Love
that
this
him.
guy.
Don't know him at
Yeah.
all.
So there's a book that's relatively short. I am not a book reader at all, but I could not put it down. And it's called Priests and Beggars, and it's by Kevin Wells, and it's incredible. I'll probably put the link in the description. That's how much I like it. I do not get paid for this recommendation, but it's worth it. Like, it's such a great book. But Venerable Aloysius, Father Al is what they called him, probably for the same reason I can't get his name out. He had such a devotion for the poor, wanted to serve the poor, help the poor. And he's just trying to figure out like what does God want from me? And he actually, when he first started seminaries from the U.S. as well, in the Washington D.C. area, he went to seminary, and it was just super luxurious, very nice, where they stayed, the dorms, everything very nice. And he literally just couldn't stay there. I don't know how I can live like this to be trained to serve the poor. So he transferred to a seminary in Belgium, and that was their dedication. They lived in concrete rooms with one window. It had a bed, a desk, and a chair, and that was it. And yeah, he loved it. And so when he, I don't know if it was a missionary priest or how that works, but when he became a priest, they actually, he wanted to be sent to the most desolate place in the world. And they ended up sending him to South Korea just after the Korean War ended.
Oh,
So when
wow.
he describes getting off the plane, and buildings were still on fire, and people were still lifting up rubble looking for family members. But he ended up doing the boys' towns and girls' towns. And actually, we met a sister from one of the orders he started, Sister Margie, that came to Christ the King recently with those boys' towns and girls' towns from, I think, Tanzania or Mexico. So that's his orders he started. So he did all these boys' towns and girls' towns, and it was awesome. He had a couple of Mary appeared to him, and the last one was he got ALS and told the Mexican bishops that he couldn't do boys' towns, girls' town, not in his state. He didn't have long to live. So he went back to his wherever hotel, whatever. I think he died in 92, because I think I was 1 when he died. But when he was staying there, went to sleep, and Mary appeared to him as Our Lady of Bonneau, or Virgin of the Poor. And as she got closer, she transformed into Our Lady of Guadalupe and told him to do the boys' towns, girls' town. So he went back the very next day and said, "Hey, we're going to do it." And so said, Mary appeared to me, and Mary told me to do this. And they finished it, did the ribbon cutting for it, and he died a week later.
Oh, wow.
Wild. Yeah, it's such a cool story. The book, though, is literally like, you can't put it down. And it's because he's a more modern saint. There's pictures of him in there.
Yeah.
Like pictures in color. There's videos you can find on the internet. He was a really, really good fundraiser. He hated doing it, but he was really good at fundraising. And so, yeah, just an awesome guy. So Priests and Beggars by Kevin Wells. So that would round out my team. So you guys know what to do. You guys comment below which team you guys think was best. And I'll typically cut this as well and put it on social media. And it's like I always say, there's no wrong answer because it's two teams of Saints. But thanks for playing and thanks for being on the show. We look forward to maybe having you back on sometime to talk about. I think we got Catholic Engaged Encounter soon, so
we do, yeah.
Talk about the weekend and how that went and stuff. But yeah, thanks for being on, and everybody else, don't forget to subscribe and everything. You know the drill, and we will see you guys next week for round 3, episode 3 of the Journey of Grace with Father Vince Fernandez. We talk about the sacraments of initiation. So you guys have a great week, and God bless.